and welcome to Economy and Markets TV, the show that takes you around the world of economic and financial news. I'm your host, Dave Okenquist, Senior Research Analyst here at Dent. It's time to recap the news of the week, which means I'm bringing on my partner, Rodney Johnson. Rodney, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm sure everybody knows Rodney, but just in case you don't know, he's the co-founder and senior editor of Dent Research, so it's always great to have your expertise here each and every week. Rodney and I have highlighted the most important news items of the week and sometimes a little humor bit, and then we do have one for today this week. I want to keep Rodney moving and keep the show moving, so if he goes over 2 minutes, he will hear this sound. He hates it. It just devastates him.
The bell.
All right, let's get into our first thing. It's on housing. We had housing starts. They rose 5% in May, but 20% for the year. Rodney say this is not all rosy. However, just going to existing home side real quick. Those fell 0.4% in May, down 3% for the year, but yet the median sales price keeps rising. It's now at a record of $265,000. Rodney, unaffordability definitely seems like a big problem, something we've been talking about, and it keeps getting worse, it seems.
It does. And that's, of course, what's holding down, it's what I think is holding down existing home sales. And we have to keep in mind the balance. We talk about, housing starts, new home sales will come out, and, of course, existing home sales. We have to remember existing home sales are 90% of the market. They are, the 800-pound gorilla here.
Yeah.
And so new homes are interesting, and it's what we want to see. We want to see that growing because adding capacity is a good thing, or adding supply, rather. But if existing home sales are falling or, trending lower a little bit, that's worrisome. As you noted, the median sale price is actually higher. And so what we have is this yawning gap between the number of units turning over and the price. And so we've talked about affordability for a long time. Yeah. We don't see median wages going up dramatically, and yet you're seeing prices go up. At some point, people say, I just can't do this. And so find it very interesting that this is kind of holding it back. There are a couple of other pieces in the real estate market. There's a lack of people who are working in the market in terms of construction workers. There's also a higher price and shortage of some construction materials and some equipment. And so a number of things working against real estate right now, not drawing it down, just kind of making it plateau.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll keep an eye on that. And just to hit on affordability, I'm sure you probably saw this yesterday, but in case anybody didn't, there was a report from Adam Data Solutions where they measure housing affordability. They sort of just do that city by city, that sort of median income versus the price. Right. And they found that nationwide, housing affordability is the worst it's been since, I believe, the third quarter of 2008. Does that sound familiar to anybody?
Right. But when you look at those and it's good data, look through that data. And so, any of the listeners or viewers who are watching this, if you're looking through things like affordability, got to take it with a grain of salt. Miami has terrible affordability numbers. New York has some terrible affordability numbers. But one of the reasons is people will buy housing units there, a condo, a house, whatever, that they never live in and they don't go to because they're rich and they just want it in that location. And so it ends up with this weirdness where you have really high prices, but it's not because the local population is expected to support those. So it's something that is worth looking at, but then look through the numbers a little bit to make sure that you're getting the right data from it.
And actually those do, it's all about time. It's all about location, right? As they always say. So Every city is different. So absolutely.
Yep.
Okay. So let's move on to our next topic. This one was a bit of some kind of a shock news, or at least can rattle some cages in the retail market. The Supreme Court yesterday ruled that internet retailers can collect sales tax, even if the merchant doesn't have a physical presence there. We saw a little bit of this going on. I believe it was maybe last year, a year ago, because me in Florida, I noticed suddenly buying on Amazon that things were getting taxed where they hadn't been before. It's not my initial take is things are just about to get more expensive across the board buying online for consumers. But what else does this mean?
Well, it's really about e-commerce, as we know. But 25, 30 years ago, people would go across the state lines and buy something in another state, like a piece of jewelry, a piece of art. And then they would have it shipped to their home to avoid sales tax. Okay. And so they were specifically trying to avoid sales tax. When e-commerce came along, you'd buy something online from a retailer that didn't have a physical location in your state, they would say, hey, we don't charge sales tax. That's not the same as saying sales tax isn't due. Sales tax was always due, and it was the responsibility of the consumer. But I can guarantee no one watching this, or rather maybe one or two out of the many thousands, actually filed that form each year to say, here's the sales tax I should have paid on those internet purchases.
Well, hold on. I reject the implication that I violated U.S. tax law. So
that you're a tax evader?
Yeah.
Okay, we won't talk about you specifically, Dave. But people just didn't. And so they were not paying the sales tax that was due to the states on their consumption. And it just is what it is. And so Amazon for a long time said, hey, we're not charging sales tax. But then they flipped several years ago and they said, look, we want our products much closer to our consumers. And so we're going to collect sales tax everywhere we can. And we're going to do this on Amazon sales. It's not on everything sold on Amazon very differently. There are third-party retailers that sell on Amazon where the tax isn't collected. And so what this does is say, hey, people, we've all got to get onto the same page here. The question is about compliance, because when you think about sales tax, you think about one number, but it's not. It's actually a compilation of the state sales tax, the local sales tax, maybe the local, economic development corps or the local transportation district. Very difficult to keep track of all that. That's going to be the problem for this.
Yeah, it's not a big headache.
It really is. And you saw a number of big online retailers, Wayfair and Overstock and others, take a hit on this news. As you and I talked about before we recorded this, it's not going to change our consumption habits. We're still going to buy online because all the things we like about it, convenience, incredible opportunity to buy things you wouldn't have seen before, all that's still the same. You're going to pay a little bit more, and rightfully so, because now the money goes where it's supposed to.
Yeah, great stuff there. So things are just going to get a little more expensive, and it's going to be a little bit more friction for businesses, and somebody will have to come up with some solution because e-commerce is certainly not going away.
Exactly.
All right, let's move on to our next one. Canada legalizes recreational marijuana. They, as you said in the copy, they are the first country other than Uruguay, I believe. They're the first G7 country to legalize marijuana, and you could buy it possibly as early as October. They cite the tax benefits. We've seen that in Colorado, which you actually wrote about. You also wrote about medical marijuana just as its own topic. So this is kind of interesting. I know the polling in the United States, it's either at or above 50%. I think the real question is this coming to the United States, Rodney?
Well, and I think it is. I think it's coming to all of the Western world because the question is, you're fighting it. At what cost are you fighting it? What benefit are you getting from it?
Right.
And is the other path, legalization, a better way? And if you look at marijuana, there is no known quantity on which you can overdose. If you're allergic to it, like you're allergic to anything, peanuts or anything else, you can certainly have a terrible reaction. But there's no known quantity that actually kills you. Versus alcohol or other things, which certainly do.
Right.
And yet we spent so much money, I mean, tens and tens of billions of dollars fighting it and creating an illegal market, or at least allowing that to flourish. This brings it into the open, allows you to tax it and to, meet the issue head on. And so if people want to do this, well, it's one of those things where you should push it down to the states and allow them to figure out what they want to do. The Canadians are doing exactly that. They legalized it nationally, but they leave it up to each of the provinces to figure out how they're going to roll it out, which is why it's going to take from now until mid-October to do that.
Yeah.
But as you noted, they've had medical marijuana since 2001, noting obviously the medical benefits of it.
Right.
In the United States, marijuana is still a Schedule I drug, and one of the qualifications is no known medical benefit, which is clearly not true. And so we need to rip that off no matter what, so that we can get to the medical benefits of cannabis, which do exist, and to allow some of these state organizations to operate with the banking system and everything else. So it's coming. How long? I don't know. I'd say less than 5 years.
Yeah, that makes sense. The way I look at it, and I happened to just look this up yesterday, 1 in 6 Americans are on some kind of a psychiatric drug. And we know about the opiate crisis. This is devastating a lot of our communities. So, maybe there's this thing that's not it's a drug, obviously, but maybe this is an alternative at least. I mean, we're it's not as though we're not taking drugs in this country, right?
Right. And the first thing is to acknowledge where we are. Right. We have had this war on drugs since the Nixon administration. We have spent so much money. We have spilled so much blood in this. And it's not that we're getting rid of all that, because there are many drugs that you don't want around, you don't want people exposed to. Right. But it doesn't mean that everything should be in that category. If it was, I wouldn't have had coffee this morning. I wouldn't have a drink this evening.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. All right, so let's move on to our final topic. This one is just really fun for me. President Trump wants to add a Space Force as the 6th branch of the U.S. military on the level of the Air Force. I just love this. The idea of who doesn't want to join the Space Force, Rodney?
Exactly. Or see somebody they don't like very much join the Space Force and go on a mission to not come back for years. There's always that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the militarization of space is probably coming anyway. So it may just be good to get ahead of it. We've seen this thing about, you've probably seen these stories over the years about Chinese shooting lasers at our satellites, that whole thing. There was even something out of a Science Digest that suggests that forming a space force can help us fight, Earth-ending events like asteroids and all that, being able to blow them out of the sky. This sounds like a lot of fun. I don't see a lot of downside here. What's your take on this?
Well, I think we have a lot of problems, here on Earth that we can address before we spend money on a space force. And so just from a practical matter, I think, do you need a force? Because in my head, that becomes something the size of the Air Force, the Marines, the Army. I don't know that that's what the administration is talking about. I do believe that we need to focus on space because, as you note, I mean, the militarization of space is coming. We're not the only people that are going to space. And so other people have a very different idea of how it should go. And so I don't mind us establishing some presence or some, precedence up there for what we're doing. I just wouldn't want to see a lot of assets put toward it when I can think of a lot of issues here at home that start with, homelessness, education, poverty, access to jobs. It's like, people, we got a lot of things we can focus on before we start, trying to put troops patrolling Mars.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one of the ideas here is that a lot of different branches and different agencies deal with things in space, and to just sort of maybe put it onto the shoulders of one entity to handle all of that. But we'll see. We also need an approval by Congress, so this thing may never happen. But one thing I'm really looking forward to, if it does happen, are the recruitment videos.
That could be interesting, right? I don't know exactly what they would be. But, we could probably just put a little bit more money into NASA and solve some of this without militarizing NASA. That's not the point at all. Yeah. Just to develop better capabilities in space, give NASA a boost. See what happens. I live in Houston. We'd like that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, by the way, it's just before we move on out of that, the president has also expressed a desire to go back to the moon. Do you think that's going to happen anytime soon? Just throwing it out there.
I don't know. It would be interesting because we don't create rockets right now. I mean, certainly we have Jeff Bezos and we have Elon Musk and others who are doing this sort of space thing, but we don't have our own craft for it. We buy rockets from the Russians to send Americans into space. It'd be kind of disappointing to see Americans atop a Soyuz rocket going to the moon. I would prefer that we develop our own before we do that again.
Yeah, how about the moon trip brought to you by Amazon?
Now, that could be interesting. We actually have a friend, Ken Baxter, who has put down his deposit to go on the Richard Branson flight whenever it becomes a viable thing. So I'm certain there are people out there who would do it for the right price. And if you're a Prime member, you might get a discount.
Oh, I love that.
You might get your to-go food from Whole Foods, right?
Great stuff. We have gone way too long. You can see where all my interests lie here.
We're clearly getting ready for the 4th of July holiday at the end of next week. So.
Absolutely. Rockets, red glare. All right. So looking ahead to next week, we've got new home sales, U.S. home price index, and durable goods. Anything else on your mind for next week, Rodney?
That's it. It should be a quiet week. I know that 4th of July is actually the middle of the week after, but people are going to be looking at 2 weekends on either side as a bumped up holiday. And so don't expect anything big going on, except for maybe a little bit in the oil market where OPEC and some others are meeting, actually right now, talking about what they're going to do with supply. And
chances we expect an increase in production, right? Is that correct?
Right, but not a ton. So I do expect oil prices to pop back up a little bit here, which should help the energy sector.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Rodney. Thank you for joining me each week. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next week.